The Holy Gospel is written in the 20th chapter of St. Luke, beginning at the 27th verse. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way all died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, then, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married here. Jesus said to him, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and they are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is the God not of the dead, but of the living. For to him all of them are alive. Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. For a start today, how about if we start with a riddle? I'm sure that is something that you don't expect to do, is to start with a riddle. But interestingly enough, our gospel today starts with a riddle and ends up with one of the most dynamic and great promises that we could possibly imagine. Now, as you study a riddle, what is a riddle? A riddle is a question that requires quite a bit of thought, a sort of an analysis. It's an in-depth question, and it can be answered probably in many ways. But let me ask you this. This is a riddle for this morning. What question is it, if you are asked, that nobody can answer with a yes? Does anybody want to take a shot at that? Well, the answer is the question that nobody can answer with a yes and be honest about it is, are you asleep? Now, there are other things that come into play when we are talking about questions and how they need to be answered. But our text today, our gospel text, starts out with the Sadducees coming to Jesus and asking him a question. We might call it a riddle. And it involves something about the resurrection. And today is a Sunday that deals with the resurrection, the promise of heaven and eternal life. The Sadducees, I'm not going to bash the Sadducees, as many of the people that I read commentaries on this text this morning, I don't think that they were out to trap Jesus. They might have had a legitimate question, but more than that, they didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't believe in a life hereafter. The Sadducees were the religious elite. They held most of the high religious posts, and they really reviewed or considered the first 5 books of Moses the only true scriptures. The first 5 books, what we call the Pentateuch. So they might have a legitimate question asked Jesus, or did they just want to make fun of him for believing in something that they didn't believe in? As we experience sometimes when somebody is pointing out to us how irrational our religion is. But Jewish law said that if a man died and he died childless, and he had a brother, the brother should marry the widow. so the family line could continue. And so the Sadducees come up with an interesting question. Well, Jesus, how would you answer this question? And they start with saying that a woman married 7 husbands, all brothers, and they perpetuated this Jewish tradition of if they died childless, then the next brother down would marry the woman just to keep the bloodline alive. The interesting thing is that Jesus answers the question. Now, why is that so strange? Because Jesus usually didn't answer questions. According to the scriptural analysis, in the 4 Gospels, Jesus has asked 178 questions, and he answers 3 of them. Most of the time, he answers a question with a question, which is the way they say a Jew normally responds to a question. A stereotype of that, but I do that too. And if you really want to frustrate somebody, answer their question with a question or beat around the bush. And I guess I do that once in a while, maybe quite a bit, because I'm called on it every once in a while. But Jesus tries to draw out, when somebody asks a question, he tries to draw them out so they answer their own question. What is remarkable about this text this morning is he really gives an answer to their question. Let's hear what he said. First of all, he said there is a life after this life that we know of in an earthly sense. He says very frankly, there is a life to come. And that is particularly encouraging in a day now where so many of the religious people are questioning the whole concept of eternity. Even the Pope made some comment about it, that maybe it wasn't quite what we believed it should be. But Jesus said, there is a resurrection. There is a life after this one, and you will no longer die. They will be children of the resurrection. They will be like angels. The Gospels and the epistles are very clear. Peter and Paul are very clear on this issue. Yes, indeed, there is a life after death, and we are to be called the children of the resurrection. That's the first point Jesus makes. The second one that he makes is when you get in trouble, is when you try to picture heaven in some kind of likeness with the life that you are living on earth. That's a problem. And usually that's where the conflict between people and between churches comes. Is when they talk about a place that they haven't seen, a time that they have no idea, and the only clue to its existence was Jesus saying, I go to prepare a place. And eye has not seen, and ear has not heard the great things that are prepared for you. One of the interesting things of traveling to foreign countries is they don't have the same way of looking at things as we do in this country. That would be true of anybody who travels. And sometimes it is almost astonishing to find out some of the differences. I was talking to one of the guides, there were 4 of us talking to a guide, and we were asking about the social condition of one of the countries. And one of the persons said, do you have a problem with homelessness? And they said, homelessness, what's that? Well, we don't see any tents out in the street or people sleeping under a doorstep. Well, no, they don't do that. That's against the law. Well, how do they prevent it? Well, we give them a place to sleep. Why would you have people laying out in the streets? Do you have that in your country? We talked about some people about their economic situation, and we're surprised to find that in some countries capitalism is a dirty word, that it tends to separate, to make a class system. And there are some people that are very, very happy to be in a situation where they are mostly taken care of by high taxes and a government who cares. And we say, we don't like that system at all. Well, if we make that much of a mistake in this world, talking about other cultures or other countries, how much more of a trouble can we get into when we start telling you everything that we know about the eternity, from the furniture in heaven to the temperature in hell? And some people feel they have that kind of grasp on eternity. But Jesus said we don't operate the same way in eternity. And if you try to picture it in terms of what you're experiencing here on earth, you will never come to any kind of vision at all. And so don't go down that road. Now, one of the statements he makes might be disappointing to some people. He says, in the next life to come, there is no marriage. People are not given in marriage. And I know some people that have had outstanding relationships with spouses feel that that's one of the things that's going to continue. And if it doesn't continue, then they would be disappointed. But Jesus says, no matter what you conceive about heaven, it's better than you can possibly conceive. Again, because eye has not seen and ear has not heard. And whatever relationship that you had there, it'll be even better in eternity. Now that's a comforting word. It's not something to be despondent about. The third thing that Jesus says is God is the God of the living. And everything in terms of the resurrection has to be taken like everything else that's significant in the church. It has to be taken on the basis of faith. God's original purpose was to have man live with him in eternity. The plan hit a snag when man sinned and thought that he wanted to be like God. But God redeemed his people and brought a Savior. And it is his resurrection story that we celebrate today. Resurrection always remains a matter of faith. Most of you are familiar with the term, I think, or person, Carrie ten Bloom. She and her family were honored in a musical called The Sound of Music. They joined the Dutch resistance during World War II and preserved the lives of a lot of Jews with the underground. Carrie's sister died in one of the concentration camps because they were all arrested. And Carrie survived and was freed in 1945 and then moved to America and died in, I think, 1978 here in America. She made one statement that's very, very interesting and very, very powerful as far as talking about the resurrection. She said, never be afraid to trust an uncertain future to a known God. Never fear to trust an unknown future to a known God. There's another woman that made a very, very interesting comment in terms of faith. Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote a book recently called Eat, Pray, and Love. She is very well known for her fundraising and protecting of Syrian refugees, known worldwide. And she said faith is a walking face first and full speed into the darkness. There's a woman by the name of Antonia Larix, of Florida who died recently, and her family wrote a very funny obituary in her honor. They ended with these words, and I hope that you don't write this about your minister. But she said, the adult children wrote this and said, the memorial service will be led by the Reverend Kurt Moore of Orlando, Florida. A questionable choice for any spiritual event, but one the family felt would be appreciated due to the fact that every time Tony heard Kurt preach, she prayed for Jesus to come at that moment. The obituary continued like this. On a last but serious note, the woman who loved life and taught her children to laugh at the days to come is now safely in the arms of Jesus and dancing at the wedding feast of the Lamb. She will be missed as a mother, a friend, and a grandmother. And anyone wearing black will be turned away from the service because she is alive. She is not dead. The gospel lesson today starts with a riddle. Starts with a riddle about eternity and ends with a wonderful promise. A promise that we no longer have to have any questions. We just walk dutifully, boldly, face first, in full speed into the darkness that turns out to be the light. Amen.